It was one of those quiet Friday nights when most people were already home, streets were half empty, and only the soft glow of the streetlight stretched across the road. The air was calm and the hum of distant traffic filled the background. On that peaceful stretch of highway, a young woman named Tiana Williams was driving home after a long double shift at the hospital. She worked as a nurse and her days were often full of exhaustion and moments that tested her patience. But she still loved what she did. Helping people gave her life a sense of purpose. That night, Tiana's car smelled faintly of coffee and hand sanitizer, and a folded blanket sat in the passenger seat, a small comfort she carried everywhere. The radio played soft R&B music, and the rhythm helped her stay awake. Her mind wandered between fatigue and relief. She had just finished helping an elderly patient who reminded her of her grandmother, and that memory made her smile. She was only a few minutes from home and couldn't wait to kick off her shoes and rest. Up ahead, hidden behind a line of trees, a police cruiser sat parked on the shoulder. Inside was Officer Bradley Moore, a man known among his colleagues for his strict, sometimes harsh approach. He had been on the force for years, and the power that came with the badge had slowly shaped him into someone bitter and impatient. Over time, the respect he once earned from serving had turned into arrogance. He believed he could read people at a glance, and his assumptions often came from the color of their skin or the car they drove. When Tiana's small silver sedan passed by, the faint flicker of her rear light caught his attention. It wasn't even broken, just a momentary dim from a loose connection. But for Officer Moore, that was enough. He saw an opportunity, maybe even an excuse, to pull someone over. He straightened up, started his engine, and pulled out onto the road. The sudden flash of blue and red lights lit up the night behind Tiana's car. Startled, she checked her mirrors and quickly signaled to pull over. Her heart began to race as she guided her car to the side of the road. She wasn't sure what she had done wrong, but like most people, being stopped by the police made her nervous. She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. Her hands trembled slightly as she rolled down the window. Officer Moore stepped out of his cruiser and walked up slowly, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. He moved with an air of authority, the kind that came from years of people backing away when he spoke. As he reached her window, his expression was cold. "License and registration," he said sharply, shining the light straight into her face. Tiana squinted and handed over her documents. "Of course, officer. May I ask what's wrong?" He tilted his head slightly as if the question itself annoyed him. "Your taillight's out," he said. "You're lucky I caught you before someone hit you from behind." She blinked, confused. "Oh, really? I didn't know that. I'm sorry. I'll get it fixed right away." Her voice was calm and respectful, but Officer Moore didn't soften. He looked at her for a moment longer as if searching for something, an excuse to challenge her further. "Where are you coming from?" he asked. "Work," she replied. "I'm a nurse at St. Mary's Hospital." He nodded slowly but didn't seem satisfied. "You live around here?" "Yes, a few miles down," she said. She forced a small, polite smile. For a moment, silence filled the air, broken only by the chirp of distant crickets and the rumble of passing cars. Tiana could feel his eyes studying her, judging her. Something in his tone made her uneasy, like she was already guilty of something she hadn't done. "Step out of the car," he said suddenly. Tiana's stomach dropped. "Is there a problem, officer?" "I said step out," he repeated, his voice firmer now. She hesitated but knew better than to argue. Carefully, she unbuckled her seatbelt and stepped out into the cool night air. Her body tensed. Her palms felt clammy. She tried to keep her voice steady. "Did I do something wrong?" Officer Moore didn't answer. He circled her car, shining his flashlight on the back of it. The headlight and taillight both looked fine, except for the tiny flicker she had noticed earlier in the rearview mirror. But he acted as if he had caught something serious. He leaned closer and tapped the headlight with the edge of his flashlight. Then, almost casually, he lifted it and slammed it down hard. The glass cracked instantly, the sharp sound echoing in the still night. Tiana gasped. "Why would you do that?" He turned to her with a cold smirk. "Well, now you really have a broken light." She stood frozen, disbelief washing over her. "I didn't do anything wrong." "You didn't have to—" "Ma'am," he interrupted. "Watch your tone." She opened her mouth, then closed it. Her heart pounded in her chest. Every instinct told her to stay calm, to avoid making things worse. Slowly, she pulled out her phone and began recording, her hands shaking slightly. Are you recording me? He snapped. Yes, she said softly. For my safety. He stepped closer, his shadow towering over her. You don't need to record me. I'm doing my job, Tiana didn't respond. She just held the phone steady. For a long moment they stood there, the young nurse exhausted but firm and the officer glaring at her like she had challenged his authority. The power imbalance between them felt heavy in the air. Finally, he took a step back, muttered something under his breath, and handed her a warning slip. You're free to go, he said. Get that fixed. She took the paper silently, her eyes still wide with disbelief. Thank you, she said, even though gratitude was the last thing she felt. She got back into her car and started the engine, her hands trembling as she gripped the steering wheel. Her headlights reflected the shattered glass ahead, small cracks sparkling like spider webs under the beam. As she drove off, tears welled up in her eyes. She couldn't believe what had just happened. She had done nothing wrong. She was just trying to get home. The entire encounter had left her shaken and confused. Still, she knew she had done the right thing by recording it. Something deep inside told her that the truth would matter. A few blocks away, a man who had been filling his gas tank across the street had seen the entire thing. He watched as the officer smashed her light and shook his head in disbelief. He had filmed part of it on his phone too, thinking it might be important later. Meanwhile, Officer Moore got back into his cruiser, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and irritation. He convinced himself he had done nothing wrong. To him, it was just another traffic stop, another moment of control. But as he drove off, unaware of the cameras that had caught his every move, the world around him was already changing. That quiet street would not stay quiet for long. Within minutes, the truth would start to spread, and the balance of power that he had taken for granted would shift in a way he could never have imagined. For Tiana, that short encounter was more than just a traffic stop. It was a moment that would change everything. She didn't know it yet, but the video she had recorded would soon travel beyond that dark stretch of road, beyond her small town, and into the hearts of thousands who had lived through moments just like hers. She drove the rest of the way home in silence, the broken glass on her headlight reflecting tiny points of light onto the pavement. To her, it looked almost symbolic, like something fragile that had been destroyed for no reason yet still shining in the dark. She parked, turned off the engine, and sat there for a long time replaying every word, every sound. In that stillness, she whispered to herself, "This isn't right," her voice trembled. But there was something new in it too, something stronger than fear. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but deep down, she felt that truth always had a way of finding its way into the light. Later that same night, the air outside was cooler and the streets were still quiet. But inside Tiana's mind, everything was loud. She couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened on that dark road. Her hand still trembled a little as she replayed the moment again and again. The sound of glass breaking, the officer's cold tone, the helplessness she had felt. When she got home, she sat in her car for a long time before going inside. The porch light from her small apartment building flickered like her broken headlight, and for some reason that sight made her chest tighten. She finally stepped out, grabbed her bag, and walked up the short flight of stairs to her front door. Inside, everything was quiet except for the faint hum of her refrigerator. She placed her keys on the table and dropped her bag on the couch, then just stood there staring at the wall. Her phone buzzed softly. It was her best friend calling, wondering if she made it home safely. Tiana hesitated before answering. Her voice came out low. "Yeah, I'm home. You sound upset." "What happened?" Tiana took a deep breath. "I got pulled over. For no reason. The officer said my light was out, but it wasn't. Then he broke it himself." There was a pause on the other end. "He did what?" Tiana tried to explain everything, but her throat tightened as she spoke. Her friend listened quietly, letting her vent, letting her cry a little when she couldn't hold it in. "You recorded it, right?" her friend asked softly. "Yeah," Tiana said, "I did. I just didn't think it would actually come to this." After hanging up, she sat on the couch with the phone still in her hand. She played the video back. It wasn't long, maybe a minute and a half, but it was clear. You could hear her calm voice, the officer's harsh tone, and then the sound of the light breaking. Even without seeing faces clearly, the actions spoke for themselves. She sighed. "I just wanted to go home," she whispered. Meanwhile, just a few miles away, Officer Moore sat in his cruiser, writing his report. He described the incident in a few dry lines. Driver stopped for vehicle equipment violation. Warning issued. No further action. His handwriting was neat, his tone detached. To him, it was just another night, another small encounter that would soon be forgotten. He didn't know that across the street from where he had stopped Tiana, a young man at a gas station had recorded the entire thing. That man had been waiting for his tank to fill when he saw the officer strike the headlight. Shocked, he had quickly pulled out his phone and started filming. He hadn't planned on posting it right away, but later, when he got home and watched it again, his conscience told him that what he had seen wasn't right. The next morning, Tiana woke up early even though she hadn't slept much. Her eyes were puffy and her mind still felt heavy. She made herself a cup of coffee and sat by the window. Sunlight filled the room, but she didn't feel its warmth. Every time she thought about the officer's smirk, her chest tightened again. She opened her phone and saw a message notification from her friend. Check social media. When she did, her breath caught in her throat. The video from the gas station had been posted overnight. It had already been shared thousands of times. The caption said, "Officer destroys driver's headlight during traffic stop for no reason." People were commenting non-stop. Some were angry, some were heartbroken, and others were simply in disbelief. At first, Tiana didn't know what to feel. Her stomach turned as she watched strangers discuss what had happened to her. It felt strange seeing her own car in a video online, but she was also relieved someone else had seen it. Someone else knew she wasn't imagining things. Her phone began to buzz over and over, texts, calls, and social media messages pouring in. Friends, co-workers, even people she hadn't spoken to in years reached out to check on her. Some said they were proud of her for staying calm. Others said they were angry on her behalf. By midday, news outlets had picked up the story. A reporter called her workplace asking if she wanted to make a statement. She said no at first. She wasn't ready for that kind of attention. She was still processing it all. Meanwhile, at the police department, the atmosphere was tense. The chief had already seen the video. When Officer Moore walked in, conversation stopped. People looked at him differently, some avoiding eye contact altogether. He had no idea what was happening until his supervisor called him into the office. "Close the door, Bradley," the chief said, his tone flat. "We have a problem." He turned the computer screen toward him, and there it was, the same video that had already gone viral. Moore's jaw tightened. "That's out of context," he said immediately. She was being uncooperative. The chief didn't look convinced. "I don't care what you think it was. The public sees an officer destroying a citizen's property without cause. We're launching an internal review. Until then, you're suspended with pay." Moore clenched his fist but said nothing. As he left the office, whispers followed him down the hall. He felt anger boiling inside him, not at himself, but at the fact that someone had caught him. Back at home, Tiana sat quietly on her couch, watching everything unfold from her phone screen. She hadn't planned on being part of a story that spread across the internet. All she wanted was an apology, maybe some accountability. But now, things were moving faster than she could process. Her friend came over later that evening with takeout food and a hug. "You did nothing wrong," she said. "Don't forget that," Tiana nodded slowly. "I just don't want this to define me," she said. "I didn't ask for any of this." Her friend smiled gently. "Maybe it won't define you. Maybe it'll change something bigger than you." Those words stuck in Tiana's mind long after her friend left. That night, she sat by the window again, phone in hand, scrolling through messages from strangers. People thanking her for staying calm. People sharing their own stories of unfair treatment. It was overwhelming but also comforting. She realized she wasn't alone. On the other side of town, Officer Moore sat alone in his car in his driveway. The world around him felt smaller than it used to. His phone buzzed constantly. Some messages from coworkers, others from people he didn't know, filled with anger and disgust. The news had already mentioned his name. Reporters waited outside his house. He drew the curtains closed and turned off the TV, but the noise of the world wouldn't stop. For the first time in a long time, he felt powerless. The badge that once made him feel untouchable now felt heavy. He tried to convince himself it wasn't his fault, that people were overreacting, but deep down, a quiet part of him knew that what he had done wasn't just about a headlight. It was about the way he had treated someone who didn't deserve it. By the end of the second day, the video had millions of views. Local leaders began calling for answers. and community members planned a peaceful gathering outside the police department. People carried signs that read, "Justice for Tiana" and "Respect every voice." Tiana watched it all on live streams, feeling both scared and proud. She never wanted fame, but she knew this moment wasn't just about her anymore. It was about fairness, respect, and the quiet strength it took to stay calm in the face of injustice. Late that night, she finally decided to post something herself. Her hands shook slightly as she typed. "All I wanted was to get home safely. I didn't want this attention, but maybe it can help others who have gone through the same. Thank you to everyone who has supported me. Please keep things peaceful. Let's make this about change, not hate." She hit post and set her phone down. The room was quiet again, but it felt different now, lighter somehow. She felt a small sense of peace knowing that she had spoken up, even in a small way. Across town, Moore couldn't sleep. The flashing lights of reporters' cameras outside his window reminded him of the patrol lights from that night. Only now he wasn't the one in control. The same power he once used so easily had turned against him, and while he sat there in the dark, replaying his actions, Tiana finally allowed herself to rest. Her world had changed in just one night, but deep down she knew something important was happening. The truth had a way of finding its way into the open, even when people tried to hide it. As she drifted to sleep, her phone buzzed softly again. More messages, more support, but she didn't check them. For the first time in a long while, she felt like the light that had been broken wasn't gone. It had only found a new way to shine. The morning sun was bright, but the town didn't feel normal anymore. There was something different in the air, something tense but awake. People had seen the video, talked about it at breakfast tables, and shared it in group chats. The story of the young nurse and the officer had reached nearly every corner of the internet. Everyone had an opinion, everyone had emotions, and everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. Tiana woke up that morning feeling drained. Her phone had been buzzing nonstop for 2 days. News outlets wanted interviews, strangers wanted to thank her, and some people were just curious. It was hard for her to understand how quickly everything had changed. 2 nights ago, she was just another tired nurse trying to get home. Now her face and her name were trending online. She made herself a cup of tea and tried to stay calm. Every time she checked her phone, she saw her own car on the screen. The moment when the glass broke, her quiet voice asking why. The look on her face. She didn't like watching it, but it reminded her of the truth. She wasn't crazy. She hadn't imagined it. Her neighbor, an older woman who often left flowers on her porch, knocked on her door. "I saw you on the news, sweetheart," she said, handing her a small bunch of daisies. "You did nothing wrong. I'm proud of you for staying calm." Tiana smiled softly. "Thank you. It's been a lot." "I can imagine," the woman said, "but you keep your head high. People are standing with you now." Those words stayed in Tiana's mind long after her neighbor left. She looked out the window and saw a few cars passing by slowly, as if people were curious to see where she lived. It made her uncomfortable, but it also showed how big this story had become. Across town, Officer Moore's life had started to fall apart in ways he never expected. His phone had been ringing all morning, not with friendly calls, but with reporters wanting statements and people leaving angry messages. Even some of his old friends avoided him. He had been told to stay home until the investigation was complete. The badge that once gave him pride now sat on his kitchen table, and every time he looked at it, he felt a mix of anger and fear. His wife tried to speak to him, but he snapped easily. "They're blowing this out of proportion," he said, pacing the living room. "I didn't do anything wrong. I was just doing my job." She watched him quietly. "Maybe you should just tell the truth," she said gently. He stopped walking. "What truth? That a girl decided to make a scene and now everyone wants to ruin my career?" But even as he said those words, deep down he knew it wasn't true. He remembered the way he'd hit the light, the sound of it cracking, the look on her face. He had crossed a line, and part of him couldn't stop replaying that moment either. By midday, the police department held a small press conference. The chief stood at a podium, reading from a short statement. He said that the department was aware of the viral video and that an internal investigation had begun. He promised transparency and fairness. He didn't defend the officer, but he didn't condemn him either. It was a careful speech meant to calm people down, but it didn't work. Outside the station, dozens of people were already gathered. Some held signs asking for justice, others just stood in silence. Reporters were everywhere, microphones pointed, cameras rolling. The story had grown beyond one small town. It was being discussed across the country now. Tiana watched the press conference from her couch. She didn't know what to expect from it, but hearing the words internal review made her uneasy. She didn't trust that it would be enough. Her phone buzzed again. It was her hospital manager checking in. "Take all the time you need," he said kindly. "We're proud of how you've handled everything." She thanked him and hung up, feeling both grateful and overwhelmed. The support was comforting, but it was also heavy. She didn't want to be famous for something painful. She wanted peace. That evening, a lawyer reached out to her. His tone was calm, professional, and respectful. "I'm not here to push you into anything," he said. "But what happened to you was wrong, and I can help you make sure it's handled properly." Tiana hesitated. "I don't want to start a fight. I just want things to change." "That's exactly why people need to hear your story," he said gently. "You didn't yell, you didn't resist, you stayed calm, and that matters. You showed grace in the middle of something unfair." She thought about his words for a while before agreeing to meet with him the next day. She didn't know where this would lead, but she knew she couldn't stay silent. Meanwhile, social media continued to buzz. People were debating the situation everywhere. Some defended the officer, saying maybe there was more to the story, while others were outraged and demanded justice. But what stood out most were the messages from people who had been through similar situations, people who had felt powerless before. One message caught Tiana's eye. It said, "Thank you for staying calm. Watching you reminded me that dignity is power." That message made her tear up a little. She realized that maybe something good could come out of this after all. Later that night, a news anchor mentioned her name on television, calling her the woman whose quiet courage sparked a conversation. It felt strange hearing herself described that way. She wasn't trying to be brave. She was just trying to survive that night. Across town, Officer Moore sat in his dark living room, the sound of the TV echoing through the silence. When he heard his name mentioned, he turned the volume down. The reporters called him the suspended officer under investigation. That title hit him like a punch. He had always seen himself as someone who kept order, but now he was the one being judged. He thought about calling his partner from work, but he knew the department had told everyone not to discuss the case. He felt alone, isolated in his own house, watching the world turn against him. His wife finally spoke from across the room. "Maybe it's time to take responsibility," she said softly. He didn't answer. He just stared at the badge on the table and wondered how everything had changed so quickly. The next morning, the story reached national headlines. News vans lined the streets near the police station. The mayor announced that an independent team would review the incident. Tiana's lawyer stood beside her at a brief press meeting. She didn't say much, just that she wanted the truth and hoped for fairness. Her calm voice and gentle demeanor won people over even more. Reporters described her as thoughtful, strong, and poised under pressure. The comments online shifted from outrage to admiration. While all this was happening, Officer Moore was called back to the department for questioning. He walked in quietly, wearing plain clothes instead of his uniform. For the first time in years, he felt small inside that building. He sat across from the investigators, who asked direct questions about what happened that night. He tried to defend himself at first, saying he felt threatened, but the investigators showed him the video again, both the bystanders' footage and Tiana's phone recording. He couldn't say anything after that. The silence in the room was heavy. When the interview ended, he walked out feeling hollow. The world outside felt too bright, too loud. Cameras followed him to his car. He didn't say a word. That evening, Tiana's friend came over again. They sat on the couch eating dinner together, trying to talk about normal things, but the conversation always came back to what was happening. "I still can't believe this," Tiana said quietly. "It's like my life isn't even mine right now." Her friend nodded. "I know, but you're handling it with so much grace. You're doing better than most people could." Tiana smiled faintly. "I'm just trying to do what feels right." Outside, the world was still talking, still watching, still waiting. But in that small apartment, for a brief moment, things felt calm. The truth had already begun to move beyond both of them, beyond one broken headlight or one bad decision. It had become something bigger, something that people couldn't ignore anymore. As night fell, Tiana stood by the window and looked out at the city lights. They flickered just like the one that had been broken that night, but now they seemed to shine even brighter. She took a deep breath and whispered to herself, "Let the truth do what it needs to do." In another part of town, Officer Moore sat alone again, staring at the same badge he once wore proudly. He didn't know what would happen next, but deep down, he knew things would never go back to the way they were. The story that began on a quiet road was now in every household, every conversation, and every newsfeed. And though neither of them could see the full picture yet, both their lives were about to change forever. The days that followed were a whirlwind that neither Tiana nor Officer Moore could fully understand. The world had seen what happened. The video had been played, replayed, slowed down, and analyzed by everyone, from news anchors to people sitting on their couches with coffee in hand. For some, it was just another headline. But for others, it was proof of something they had felt for years but couldn't always explain. Tiana tried to keep her days quiet. She had always been someone who valued peace, who avoided drama. But now peace felt like a luxury she no longer had. Every time she stepped outside, she felt the weight of eyes on her. Neighbors smiled at her kindly. Strangers honked to show support, and people she didn't even know left kind notes on her doorstep. One read, "Thank you for being brave when you didn't have to be." She appreciated the kindness. But she also longed for her old life, the one where her biggest worry was finishing a long shift at the hospital. Her lawyer had been keeping her updated. "The investigation is moving quickly," he said one morning over the phone. "There's a lot of pressure on the department right now." "They can't ignore it," Tiana sighed softly. "I don't want revenge. I just want to make sure this doesn't happen again to anyone." "I know," he said gently. "And that's what makes your case different. You're not angry. You're honest. People feel that." Across town, Officer Moore's world had completely unraveled. He woke up each day to messages that he didn't want to read and headlines that made his stomach twist. The department had officially suspended him without pay pending investigation. The same colleagues who once joked with him in the break room now avoided his calls. He spent most of his days pacing his small living room, curtains drawn, TV off. The silence was heavy. His wife had gone to stay with her sister for a while, saying she needed space. He didn't argue. Deep down, he knew she was ashamed of him, even if she didn't say it out loud. For the first time in years, he had too much time to think. He thought about the road that night, about the way he had spoken to Tiana. He tried to tell himself that he was just doing his job. But the memory of the sound, the sharp crack of glass, kept echoing in his mind. It didn't sound like duty. It sounded like anger. He sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. The badge still sat there, dull and lifeless, its shine gone. It used to mean something to him, a symbol of pride and service. But now it looked like a reminder of everything he had lost. Outside, the public's voice grew louder. Peaceful marches filled the streets. People carried signs that said, "Justice for all and accountability matters." The protests weren't chaotic. They were calm, but powerful. Families came with their children. Nurses stood beside teachers, and people of all backgrounds walked together. Tiana didn't attend at first. She didn't want the attention, but one afternoon she drove by one of the gatherings and saw a young girl holding a handmade sign that read, "I want to be brave like her." It stopped her heart for a moment. She parked her car and just sat there, watching the people move together in unity. She realized then that this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about what her story had come to represent. The police department tried to manage the situation. The chief appeared on television again, this time looking more serious than before. "We take this matter very seriously," he said. "The actions seen in the video do not reflect the values of our department. Officer Moore's employment is currently under review." The news spread quickly. Reporters waited outside Moore's house now. Cameras flashed when he opened his front door, even just to get his mail. "Officer Moore, do you have any comment?" they shouted. But he stayed silent. Every word he might say felt meaningless now. That night he sat alone, flipping through old photos, pictures of him when he first joined the force, full of pride and energy, shaking hands with city officials, smiling in his crisp uniform. He barely recognized the man in those photos. Somewhere along the way, the meaning of his job had changed for him. What once was about protecting people had turned into something about control. And now that need for control had taken everything from him. Meanwhile, Tiana's lawyer arranged a small press conference. He insisted it would be safe and respectful. Tiana was nervous. She stood behind the podium with cameras in front of her, bright lights making her blink. She had never been one for public speaking, but she took a deep breath and spoke slowly. "I didn't want this kind of attention," she began softly. "I just wanted to get home that night. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't disrespect anyone. I just wanted to be treated fairly. And I think that's what everyone deserves." She paused, her hands steady even though her heart raced. "This isn't about hate. I don't hate anyone. I just want things to be right. I want people to be safe and respected no matter who they are." Her words were simple, but they carried weight. The room was quiet for a moment after she spoke, then filled with the sound of camera shutters and murmurs of support. That video of her statement spread too, but this time it wasn't about anger. It was about hope. Her calmness inspired people. She didn't speak like a victim. She spoke like someone who had been hurt but refused to let that pain turn into bitterness. She became a symbol of quiet strength. At home that evening, Tiana sat by her window again, watching the lights outside. She thought about how strange life was, how one small moment could change everything. Her broken headlight had started something she could never have imagined. Over the next few days, news broke that the police department had finished its internal review. Officer Moore was officially terminated for misconduct. The report stated that his actions during the traffic stop were unjustified and unprofessional. It also mentioned that previous complaints against him had been ignored in the past, which only added to the department's embarrassment. When the announcement was made, Tiana was sitting at her kitchen table. Her phone buzzed with messages from people congratulating her, telling her justice had been served. But she didn't feel like celebrating. Justice to her didn't mean happiness, it meant healing. She looked out the window again, her reflection faint in the glass. She whispered to herself, "I just hope this means something changes." Across town, Moore sat on his porch staring into the distance. He had already known what was coming, but hearing it made it real. He had lost everything, his job, his reputation, the respect of his peers. The phone calls had stopped. The house was quiet. He picked up the badge one last time, turned it over in his hand, and placed it in a drawer. It didn't belong to him anymore. Later that week, Tiana decided to return to work. Her coworkers greeted her with hugs and warm smiles. "We're proud of you," one of them said. "You handled it with so much grace." She smiled, feeling both shy and grateful. Going back to her patients, walking the same hospital halls felt healing in its own way. The simple rhythm of helping people reminded her who she really was. Not a headline, not a symbol, but a person who cared deeply about others. At the end of her shift, as she walked to her car, she noticed the repaired headlight shining clearly in the parking lot. It made her smile. It wasn't just a fixed piece of glass. It felt like a sign that things could be made right again even after being broken. In that quiet moment, she thought about how far she had come since that night. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. Sometimes, the hardest moments lead to the most unexpected light. And somewhere in that same town, Officer Moore sat alone in his dark living room, the faint sound of a TV in the background. He didn't have the life he once did, but he finally understood something he never had before. The power he once used carelessly was meant to protect, not destroy. The weight of that realization would stay with him for the rest of his life. As for Tiana, her story wasn't over. It was still being written, one quiet, steady step at a time. The world had seen her pain, but now it would also see her strength. And even though the light had once been shattered, it was shining again, brighter than ever. The days slowly began to settle after the chaos. News reporters had started to move on to other stories, and the crowd outside the police department had faded away. But even with the calm returning, the impact of what happened still echoed through the town. Everyone remembered it. Everyone had learned something from it. Tiana's life had changed in ways she never expected. She was back at work now, walking through the familiar hospital halls, greeting her coworkers and checking on patients just like she used to. But things felt different. People looked at her not just as a nurse anymore, but as someone who stood up quietly for what was right. Sometimes, while she worked, patients or family members would recognize her. They would thank her softly, not wanting to make a scene. One older man clasped her hand and said, "You showed the world what calm courage looks like." She smiled kindly and told him she was just doing what anyone would have done. But deep down she knew not everyone would have stayed as composed as she did that night. At first she didn't want to be called brave. She just wanted her life to go back to normal. But as days passed, she started to realize that maybe normal wasn't meant to be the goal anymore. Maybe this was a new beginning. One morning her lawyer called with some unexpected news. "There's a settlement offer," he said. "It's more than we anticipated. They want to resolve things quietly." Tiana didn't know how to feel. Money couldn't erase what happened. But she also knew that it could help her create something meaningful. After a few days of thinking, she told her lawyer that she wanted part of the money to go toward something good, something lasting. "I want to start a scholarship," she said. "For students like me, people from working families, people who want to help others, but can't afford school." Her lawyer paused for a moment, then said softly, "That's a beautiful idea." And so, within weeks, the Williams Nursing Scholarship Fund was created. It wasn't huge at first, but it was real. Local businesses donated. People from across the country sent small amounts, and before long, it had grown into something special. The local news station covered the story, showing Tiana standing in front of a small banner with her name on it. She smiled shyly into the camera and said, "This isn't about me. It's about creating opportunities. It's about turning something painful into something positive." Her words touched people again. The video of her announcement spread online, just like the first video had. But this time the story was full of hope, not anger. People shared it saying, "Look what she did after everything she went through." Even though she had been through so much, Tiana stayed humble. She still took the bus sometimes, still stopped by her favorite coffee shop before work, still called her mother every night just to talk. The fame never went to her head because she never wanted it in the first place. What she wanted was peace, and now she was slowly finding it. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Officer Moore was living in the quietest months of his life. The noise, the reporters, the attention, all of it had gone away. What was left was the silence of his small house and the weight of his thoughts. He no longer wore his uniform, but sometimes he would open his closet and see it hanging there, pressed and unused. It reminded him of everything he had once been and everything he had lost. There were moments when he almost wanted to call Tiana, to apologize, but he knew that wasn't his choice anymore. She didn't owe him forgiveness. He started volunteering at a community center, mostly because he didn't know what else to do with his time. At first, people were cold toward him. They recognized him. But he didn't argue or make excuses. He just showed up, cleaned the hallways, helped set up food drives, and stayed quiet. Slowly, people began to see that he was trying to change. One afternoon, while sweeping the floor, a woman approached him. "You're that officer, aren't you?" she asked. He looked down. "Yes," he said quietly. She studied him for a long moment before saying, "At least you're doing something now." He nodded. "I'm trying." Her tone softened slightly. "Keep trying." Those two words stayed with him for the rest of the day. Back at the hospital, Tiana was beginning to feel lighter. The tension she used to carry on her shoulders was fading. Her co-workers often told her that she looked happier. She had started spending her evenings working on the scholarship program, organizing events and talking to students who applied. Some of them reminded her of herself, nervous, hopeful, but determined. One day she received an email from a young woman who had just been awarded the scholarship. It read, "I almost gave up on nursing school because I couldn't afford it. Your story gave me hope. You turned something bad into something beautiful. I promise I'll carry that same kindness into my career." Tiana read the message 3 times, her eyes stinging with tears. She realized that her pain had somehow turned into someone else's dream. That feeling was worth more than anything money could buy. She didn't talk much about the night of the incident anymore. She didn't need to. The world already knew that story. What she wanted to talk about was what came after, the growth, the forgiveness, the change. A few months later, a community event was held at the local park. The theme was unity and understanding. Leaders, teachers, and residents came together to celebrate progress and to talk about how to build a kinder community. Tiana was invited as a guest speaker. At first, she hesitated. Public speaking still made her nervous, but she agreed. When she stepped up to the microphone, the crowd fell quiet. She took a breath and began. "I've learned that sometimes the hardest moments in life can open doors we didn't know existed. I never wanted to be in the spotlight. I never wanted attention. But when life puts you in a difficult position, you can choose what to do with it. You can let it break you or you can let it teach you. The crowd listened closely as she spoke. Her voice was steady and warm. What happened to me wasn't fair, but I realized I couldn't let anger control me. I wanted to build something better out of it. That's what this scholarship means to me. It's proof that light can come from darkness. When she finished, the crowd stood up and clapped. It wasn't loud or wild, it was respectful, heartfelt, and full of admiration. After the event, people came up to thank her, shake her hand, and share their own stories. Among them was a young man who had once been a police cadet. "You made me think differently," he said, "about what it means to serve. It's not about power, it's about protection." "I won't forget that," her eyes softened. "That means more than you know," she said. That night, as she drove home, she passed by the road where everything had happened months before. The street was empty now, quiet again, just like it had been that night. She slowed down, looked at the spot where her car had once been pulled over, and sighed. She didn't feel anger anymore. Instead, she felt something like peace. The past would always be there, but it no longer owned her. Back at home, she sat on her porch with a cup of tea and watched the stars. Her life had gone in a direction she never planned, but somehow it felt right. She had found her strength not through shouting or fighting, but through patience and purpose. And somewhere, not too far away, Officer Moore was sitting on a park bench outside the community center. He was still learning how to be a better man. He still carried regret, but he also carried awareness, something he had never had before. He looked up at the night sky and whispered to himself, "Keep trying." Both of them, in their own ways, had been changed by what happened. One had found courage she never knew she had, and the other had discovered humility for the first time. As the night deepened, the town was quiet again, the streetlights glowing softly in the dark. It felt as if life had finally come full circle, broken pieces carefully finding their way back together. The light that had once been shattered now shone brighter than ever, not just from a car, but from the hearts of two people who had learned, in very different ways, that change begins when we face the truth. Months passed and life began to take on a new rhythm for everyone involved. The storm that once surrounded Tiana's name had quieted, but the story still lived in the hearts of people who had seen it. Every now and then she would meet someone who mentioned that night, always with kindness, always with respect. But she had learned how to move forward without letting it define her. Her mornings had become peaceful again. She would wake up early, make a cup of tea, and open the curtains to let the light in. The same sun that once felt harsh on dark days now felt warm, gentle, like a reminder that every day was a fresh start. She'd put on her scrubs, tie her hair back, and head to work with a quiet smile. At the hospital, her coworkers treated her with the same warmth as before, but now there was an added layer of admiration in their eyes. It wasn't about fame, it was about respect. They saw how she carried herself with calm strength and genuine kindness. That kind of spirit was rare and everyone could feel it. One afternoon, while she was helping a patient settle into their bed, a young intern approached her. "You're the nurse from the video, right?" he asked hesitantly. Tiana gave a small nod, not sure what to expect. He smiled softly. "I just wanted to say, that video changed how I think. My brother's a police officer. We talked about it for days. It made him realize how important respect is in his job. He's different now, so thank you." She paused, taken aback. "That means a lot," she said gently. "I'm glad it made a difference." Moments like that reminded her that her story wasn't just about her anymore. It had ripples that reached people she'd never meet, and that made every hard moment worth it. The scholarship fund she started was growing fast. Every week she received letters from students who wanted to apply. Some were from her own town, others from far away. They all shared the same dream, to help others, to heal, to serve. Each story she read reminded her that kindness could spread further than any act of hate ever could. One Saturday morning, she attended a small gathering for the scholarship recipients. It was held at the community center, decorated with bright banners and smiling faces. The students were full of energy and hope, talking about their classes, their goals, and the future they wanted to build. When Tiana stepped to the front of the room to say a few words, the chatter faded. She looked around and saw faces from every background, every walk of life. "When I started this," she said softly, "I didn't know how far it would go. I just wanted to make something good out of something painful. Seeing all of you here today, It makes me believe that we can always choose to build instead of break. The room filled with applause, but more than that, it filled with understanding. The kind that sits quietly in the heart and stays there. Meanwhile, Officer Moore's life had changed in a quieter, slower way. After losing his job, he spent a long time lost in guilt and silence. But little by little, he began to rebuild. Not the life he had before, but something new, something more honest. He kept volunteering at the community center. He helped organize youth programs, fixed broken furniture, and coached local kids in sports. He didn't do it for recognition. He did it because he wanted to give back in a way he never had before. One day, as he was packing up after a youth event, a teenager came up to him and asked, "Weren't you a cop before?" He froze for a second, unsure how to answer. Then he nodded. "Yeah, I was." The boy looked curious. "Why'd you stop?" Moore thought for a moment before saying, "Because I forgot what the badge meant. And when you forget that, you don't deserve to wear it." The boy nodded quietly, thinking about his words. Then he said, "Well, you're doing something good now." Moore smiled faintly. "I'm trying." That night, as he walked home under the dim streetlights, those words echoed in his head. "You're doing something good now." It was a small sentence, but it felt like a lifeline. He had written letters of apology to Tiana before, but never sent them. He didn't know if she'd want to hear from him, and he didn't want to cause her more pain. But he carried those letters in a box in his drawer, a quiet reminder of the person he used to be and the man he wanted to become. One evening, he decided to attend the Unity and Understanding event again, this time as a quiet participant. He didn't tell anyone who he was. He just wanted to listen, to learn, to be part of something healing. To his surprise, Tiana was there too, sitting at the front with a small group of speakers. She looked calm, composed, peaceful. As she spoke about compassion and growth, he felt something shift inside him, a deep sense of humility and gratitude that words couldn't describe. When the event ended, he stayed in the back, debating whether he should approach her. He didn't want to reopen old wounds, but he also knew this might be the only chance he'd ever have to say what he needed to say. As people began leaving, he finally gathered the courage to walk forward. Tiana noticed him before he spoke. For a second, surprise flashed across her face, followed by quiet recognition. "Hi," he said softly. She stood still, calm but guarded. "Hello," he swallowed hard. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for everything. I've thought about that night every day. I can't change it, but I've tried to become better since then. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I understand now." Tiana looked at him for a long moment. The air between them felt heavy but honest. Then she said quietly, "I don't hate you. I never did. I just wanted to be treated fairly." Her words were simple, but they carried more power than anything else he had heard in his life. He nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "You deserved that and more." There was a pause. Neither of them spoke for a while. The noise of people chatting in the distance faded into the background. Finally, she said, "We can't undo the past, but maybe we can both keep doing better in the future." He nodded again. "That's what I'm trying to do." They didn't shake hands. They didn't hug. But something about that quiet exchange closed a chapter that had been open for too long. It wasn't forgiveness in words, it was forgiveness in peace. Later that night, Tiana sat at her kitchen table, thinking about what had just happened. It wasn't easy seeing him again, but it also wasn't painful. It was human. And maybe that was what healing really looked like. Not forgetting, not excusing, but understanding. As the weeks went by, both of them continued moving forward in their own ways. Tiana kept working at the hospital and growing the scholarship fund. Officer Moore kept volunteering and speaking to young people about respect and responsibility. Their paths rarely crossed again, but the lessons they learned from each other stayed with them always. One day, nearly a year after the incident, Tiana received a handwritten letter in the mail. It was from a young police cadet. It read, "I studied your story during training. It changed the way I see my role. I promise to serve with compassion and fairness. Thank you for teaching me that real strength is calm, not control." Tiana smiled as she folded the letter and placed it in a small box with other keepsakes from her journey. It felt like the world was slowly, quietly becoming better, and that was enough. That evening, she drove out to the countryside where the sky was clear and the stars were bright. She parked her car, stepped out, and looked up. The repaired headlight reflected softly against the road. It made her think of how something broken could be mended and even shine brighter than before. She took a deep breath and whispered into the cool night air, "Thank you, God, for the light." Far away at the same moment, Moore sat on his porch watching the same stars. He had no idea where she was or what she was doing, but he silently hoped she had found peace. He had found his own version of it too, one built on humility, honesty, and a quiet promise to never repeat his mistakes. In the end, their lives had gone separate ways, but they were forever connected by one night that changed them both. It wasn't just a story about loss, it was a story about growth, redemption, and the power of understanding. The world kept moving, the seasons kept changing, and life went on. But somewhere in that same small town, under those same lights, two people had learned that even the darkest night could lead to the brightest morning.